question, what's so great about America? Mr. Ayers is known for his 1960s activism. He co-founded the group The Weather Underground, a self-described revolutionary group that bombed public buildings, including the U.S. Capitol, to protest the U.S.'s involvement in the Vietnam War. The debate was held at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. It's 2 hours.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's featured debate between Dinesh D'Souza and Bill Ayers. My name is Nick D'Souza, and I am a junior at Dartmouth and the current editor-in-chief of the Dartmouth Review. It is my distinct privilege to serve as your moderator this evening and to introduce you to the topic that we will be considering. Before we get underway, however, I would like to ask you all to locate the nearest emergency exits and to silence all cell phones. Please note that flash photography is strictly prohibited, but our participants would like to encourage you to take photos and share what you are seeing on social media sites. After all, when individuals like Bill Ayers and Dinesh D'Souza get together for an evening of discussion, there is sure to be much to talk about. The focus of our debate tonight has to do with the nature of America and its meaning in the world today. We will be asking our participants for their thoughts on what makes America the unique place it is and how it has both succeeded and failed in living up to its own ideals. The wording of the resolve has been left purposely vague. Our hope is that by allowing our speakers to engage with each other's ideas freely, we can take up the central question more fully and explore it in all of its related social, economic, and political forms. Part of what will make this discussion unique is the background and pedigree of its participants. In truth, we won't be hard-pressed to find two Americans whose stories and politics are more different. On the right, we have Dinesh D'Souza, a member of the class of 1983 here at Dartmouth, and a critically acclaimed author and political commentator. Born in Mumbai, India, he had a 30-year career as a writer, scholar, and public intellectual, and has been called one of the nation's most influential conservative thinkers by the New York Times Magazine. Since first bursting onto the political scene in the early 1990s, Mr. D'Souza has published 12 books, including What's So Great About America and Obama's America, The Unmaking of the American Dream. The latter of these works inspired the film 2016, Obama's America, which has since risen to become the second most successful political documentary of all time. On his left is Bill Ayers, one of the nation's premier theorists on elementary education and a former leader of the countercultural movement that opposed the Vietnam War. Born and raised in the Chicago area, he is perhaps best known for his involvement in the political activism of the 1960s and his leadership of the Weather Underground, a self-described communist revolutionary group that conducted a public bombing campaign in the 1970s. In the years since, Mr. Ayers has emerged as a leading public intellectual and has had a distinguished career as a professor of education at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He's also written extensively about social justice and has characterized education as an intellectual, ethical, and political enterprise. His most recent work, Public Enemy, was released in 2010 and describes his experiences and perspectives as an American dissident. To have two individuals of such distinction with us tonight is no small feat, and we owe their presence here to the tireless work of our sponsors and supporters. We would like to thank the Young America's Foundation for its active assistance in bringing these speakers to Dartmouth and for their generous financial support along the way. Their dedication to the ideals of liberty and the supporting apparatus of liberal debate will be displayed in full throughout the course of tonight's discussion. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of the College Republicans and the College Libertarians, whose efforts on the ground in Hanover were instrumental in ensuring the debate could take place here. Finally, we want to thank the Dartmouth community for allowing us to host this debate on its campus. We are excited at the prospect of sharing the event with you and hope that tonight's constructive exchange of ideas can positively impact the nature of our own discussions long after the debate has ended. I would now like to turn the floor over to our first speaker, Mr. Bill Ayers. He will have 18 minutes to make his opening remarks, at which point in time, Mr. D'Souza will be given another 18 minutes to make his. Both speakers will then take 5 minutes each to rebut the other's points before we provide them with 10 minutes to ask questions directly of one another. The audience will then be invited to get involved in a discussion and ask questions at the microphones stationed at the front of each aisle. This Q&A session will continue for 30 minutes until the debate ends with a brief closing from each side. We ask that audience members reserve all of their questions for the time allotted and that they present their questions clearly and directly so as to give others around them a chance to speak as well. We hope that in making this event responsive to the issues that interest you the most, we can create an engaging evening of debate that will be as enjoyable as it is memorable. And so, without further ado, I yield the floor to Mr. Bill Ayers and thank both of our speakers for participating in this forum. Mr. Ayers?
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Dinesh. And thank you all for coming. This keeps being called a debate, but I don't know who the pro or the con is. So I take it as a discussion around a really interesting and lovely question. What's so great about America? And when a dialogue was first proposed to me on this expansive question, I immediately said, I think I'll make a list. Okay, let's see. On my what's great list, topping the list, I think, is Chicago. That's right, because it's my hometown and I know it well, and because it's one small piece in all its outsized and crazy complexity of America itself. The city of the big shoulders, the essential American metropolis. Chicago is one of the things that's so awesomely great about America. The musical, sure, the song and the film, the jungle and the house on Mongo Street, Augie March and Bigger Thomas, the Blues Brothers and the filmmaking Wachowski siblings, Jimmy Corrigan, the smartest kid on earth, and Studs Terkel's Division Street, Gwendolyn Brooks's Maud Martha and Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, Nelson Algren, whose dazzling book-length love poem to Chicago is called City on the Make, once described Chicago rightly, I think, as a beautiful woman with a broken nose. He'd have said the same thing about America. So great. And there's more, of course. Lake Michigan, the vast inland sea now under siege from cataclysmic climate change, the massive inviting prairie that fires our imaginations and beckons us towards the far horizons, and the Chicago Cubs, who teach us humility and perseverance. Whenever I've traveled abroad, and often inside the United States itself, the city's name tends to evoke a cliched response. For years it was, Al Capone, rat-a-tat-tat, and then, refreshingly, Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan. In Baku, someone asked me recently if I knew Oprah. Of course, I said, it's a small town, Chicago. But today, the universal reaction on hearing the name Chicago is a single word, Obama. Yes, Chicago is home to Barack Obama, the President of the United States, the first black president in U.S. history. During the heat of the primary battle in 2008, when asked which candidate he thought Martin Luther King Jr. would support, Senator Obama responded without hesitation. Reverend King would not likely endorse any of us, he said, because he'd be in the streets building a movement for justice. Undoubtedly true, and it raises a couple of interesting points. It tells us a little bit what we ought to be thinking about our own activity. One point it raises is that if you take even a brief glance at history, you recognize that it's building movements that changes things. Lyndon Johnson, who passed the most far-reaching civil rights legislation since Reconstruction, was never part of the Black freedom movement. Franklin Roosevelt was never part of the labor movement, even though he passed incredible labor and social legislation. And Abraham Lincoln never belonged to an abolitionist party. Those three presidents are remembered because of fire from below. And that's what we ought to be concentrating on. When you think about political power, often we think about the White House, or we think about the Pentagon, or we think about that medieval auction house that we call Congress. And we think that's where power lies. But the reality is there's also power in the neighborhood and the community, the workshop, the factory, the mill, the classroom, the university, the high school. Power is there too, and that's the power we have access to. Too often we spend our time staring at the sites of power we have no access to. But in a democracy, we can't wait passively wondering what the king has in mind for us. We aren't his subjects because we are the sovereign, the collective authority, and we have the opportunity and the responsibility to enact our sovereignty every day. Chicago's Jane Addams acted out her citizenship responsibilities every day, and she's part of what's so great about America too. Socialist, feminist, lesbian, pacifist, Addams established Hull House in 1889, and with the intrepid group of crusading women, went on to create the first juvenile court in the world, which freed children from adult prisons and poorhouses, the first playground in a city park, the first public kindergarten in America, an end to child labor, and 1,000 other projects and reforms. She argued that building communities of care and compassion required more than doing good, more than volunteerism, more than the beneficent but ultimately controlling stance of a Lady Bountiful. It required rather a radical oneness with others in distress, an identity of purpose with the wretched of the earth. When she opened her settlement house with her sister activists and lived there with an open, unlocked door in the heart of a poor immigrant neighborhood with families in crisis and need, she pushed herself to see the world through their eyes, and fighting for their humanity, achieved her own humanity as well. J. Edgar Hoover, the G-Man, Wizard of Oz-like public relations skills and political opportunism outstripped any putative crime-fighting abilities, had called Jane Addams the most dangerous woman in America shortly before she became the first American woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And 50 years later, still at the helm of his vast criminal enterprise known as the FBI, bestowed that same honor on my partner, Bernardine Dorn. That's possibly the only time he and I agreed. The most dangerous woman in America, indeed. There are today countless men and women sweating out Jane Addams' hopes, and Bernardine Dorn's hopes as well, all over America, naming situations and circumstances as unacceptable, working to repair deficiencies and to right wrongs, fighting for more peace and more democracy, more joy and more justice. These men and women propel themselves to act in solidarity with, not in service to, the people with whom they work. They are what's so great about America. And what else? My list contains multitudes. First, the spirit of democracy, the precious but fragile ideal that every human being is of incalculable value, endowed with certain inalienable rights. The faith in that ideal, using faith in the biblical sense of evidence of things unseen. A conviction that the people need no kings or queens, no rulers of any kind, and that we are quite capable of making the decisions that affect our lives. And indeed, that the people with the problems are also the people with the solutions. And that the wisdom and energy of ordinary people is our most precious reality. Second, the inspiration of liberty. The aspirations toward liberation, the belief that all human beings ought to be free to invent and reinvent ourselves, to shape our identities in every sphere of our existence without the oppressive and traditional constraints of king or court or church or howling mob. And whether we are concerned with our social character or our politics, our manners or our sexual practices, we can resist convention and strike out on a path of our own choosing, even of our own making. And third, the pursuit of social justice in large and small matters. Like any compelling and layered term, social justice isn't easily or neatly defined because it's not so much a point of arrival for a specific destination as it is a longing, a journey, and a quest. It's that ceaseless striving by human beings in different places and different times, under vastly different circumstances, and pursuing a range of strategies and tactics and tools for greater fairness, greater sustainability, equity, recognition, agency, peace, and mobility. These three themes, democracy and liberty and justice, like love, are generative. The more you have, the better off you become. The more you give away, the more you have. And they are clearly dynamic and unfinished themes, pulsating with the uncertainties and chaos of life. None is static or fixed or simply instrumental, and yet each is made more vital and unrestrained when encouraged and assisted by the arts of liberty, and specifically by a small but mighty phrase easily embraced by the humanities: I wonder. It's not the known, after all, that propels people out of bed and out the door. It's not the taken for granted that prods us up the next hill or onto the next challenge. And it's not received wisdom, including all the deadly cliches of common sense, that pulls us forward and pushes us to create or to invent or to plant and build. No, the deep motivation at the core of our humanity, the powerful force driving toward enlightenment and liberation, is the vast and immense unknown. That's why that simple phrase, I wonder, is indispensable. It's where inspiration comes from, courage and vision and progress too, and revision and rethinking as well. I really don't know. As soon as you know something for sure, it becomes either boring or self-righteous, and it turns tedious or dogmatic pretty quickly. If you think all there is to know about a certain thing, then the fervor may still be there, but not the curiosity, not the drive. And at that point, the questions close down. The answers come too easily, and you become a threat to yourself and perhaps to others. There are zillions of Americans whose lives have soared on the wings of wonder. Einstein and Stravinsky and Said, Twain, Dickinson, Robeson, Chaplin, Whitman, Hughes, Hooks, Kelly, Baraka, Milk, the Marx Brothers, Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, Juno Diaz and Tommy Morello, just to name a few. In a free and democratic society, we learn to live with questions and in dialogue. We learn to speak with the possibility of being heard, and we learn simultaneously to listen with the possibility of being changed. Remember the brief but famous dialogue in the form of two simple questions between Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, shouted over a prison wall not far from here. "What are you doing in there, Henry David?" Emerson asks his incarcerated friend, locked up for refusing to pay taxes to a war-making state, a slave state. And Thoreau responds, "What are you doing out there?" That's a good question. What are you doing out there? What are you doing with your spirit of democracy, your rumors of freedom, and your various quests for justice? There's a rhythm, simple to state, but excruciatingly difficult to enact, to staying true to the spirit and inspiration of liberty and democracy and justice. Simple to state. Open your eyes, pay attention. That's step one. Be astonished, do something, and then doubt or rethink. I'll elaborate just for a minute. Open your eyes. This means you can't possibly make sensible, thoughtful, participatory decisions about the world unless you're willing to look at the world. I'm thinking of my mother, who I took care of at the end of her life, and some 20 years ago I was taking care of her. She'd broken her ankle, and she said to me, "What's this thing I've heard about global warming?" And I didn't want to scare the hell out of the old lady, so I gave her a very mild version, and she gave me a long, cold look and said, "I'm sorry I asked." Well, exactly. Because you asked, someone told you. And because someone told you, you feel yourself called upon to do something. So you open your eyes. You open your eyes and you're astonished at the beauty and the ecstasy and the loveliness all around you. And you're also astonished at the unnecessary pain and suffering that human beings impose on one another. And then you do something. You have to act on what the known demands, recognizing that you're a limited and finite being, but you have to act anyway on whatever you seem to understand. But then you have to take the fourth step. You have to rethink. You have to wonder if everything you did made sense, if there are better ways to do it. If you don't doubt, you become again orthodox and dogmatic. Some of you must know Monty Python's wonderful Life of Brian. Do you know this? You guys, you're not nerdy enough. Okay, Google it. Life of Brian, Monty Python. It's a story of a reluctant Messiah who at one point is standing on a rampart in an old ancient city like Jerusalem, and he shouts down to the mob below, "Look, you've got it all wrong," he cries. "I'm not the Messiah." And they all say, "You're not the Messiah." No, you don't need to follow me," he says. "You don't need to follow anybody. You've got to think for yourselves. You're all individuals." "Yes," they cry, "we're all individuals." They repeat it in unison. No, you're all different, says Brian, frustrated. "Yes, we are all different," they say together. And one bewildered man in the crowd turns to those around him and says, "I'm not." And the others gang up at him and say, "Shut up, you're different." So that's what dogma does to you. Remember, what's so great about America? There are the arts and the artists. Chicago and Gwendolyn Brooks begins her poem on the dedication of the magnificent Picasso statue in downtown Chicago with a question. Does man love art? She asks. Man visits art, but cringes. Art hurts. Art urges voyages. America is a place of voyages, metaphorically as well as literally. And there's always, even there, complexity and contradiction at the very heart of the matter. Centuries ago, a genuine adventurer and his band of fellow travelers plunged into the unknown, rode the wild waves until they stumbled upon the Bahamas, and as the authorized texts tell us, discovered America. We all know that story by heart, that foundational fable. And it's worth noting here that whatever else it represented, that exploit, part myth, part symbol, took a surplus of imagination and vision, resourcefulness and courage on the part of that wild and somewhat random crew. But every story has a prologue, every opening a forward. No story can ever quite begin at the beginning. And so centuries before that, another group of voyagers summoned their imaginations and visions, their own resourcefulness and courage, to travel thousands of miles on foot across the Bering Strait, down through forests and mountains into the Great Plains of North America, to settle there and bring forth generation. That's another story we all know by now. And there's a third, a central part of our shared American narrative, and another piece of what's so great. Those Americans who rose up to oppose the Castilian invasion and to resist the Colombian genocide. Osceola and Crazy Horse and Cochise also summoned courage and resourcefulness as they mobilized their own visions and their own American hopes. Clearly, history is more than the facts of the matter. It's as well the narratives we construct to circulate those facts. It's a continual creation at the dynamic intersection of what happened and that which is said to have happened. And each of us, from the start and right up until the present, both then and now, is both actor and narrator in history. We are each a work in progress, thrust into a world not of our choosing, and yet destined to choose who to be and what to become in the lively unfolding drama.
2 minutes.
How many?
2.
Oh gosh, I may have to take 3, sorry. America is an immense landscape, a crazy quilt, and the people, yes, the people, the opening lines to Carl Sandburg's classic love song, To America, where we come from and where we will forever return. Here's a fun fact you may not know about Carl Sandburg. He moved to Chicago from Milwaukee, where he'd served as secretary to that city's first socialist mayor. The city had the longest run of socialist mayors in American history, and one of them, Daniel Webster Hone, had met Albert Parsons as a 5-year-old child in 1886. Parson was later hanged for his role in the famous Haymarket demonstrations that had turned into a police riot and massacre. But when he was on the run from the Chicago police, he hid out for a time in the Waukesha home of Daniel's socialist parents, who owned a factory there. Albert Parsons was from Texas and had fought with the Confederacy during the Civil War, went through an essential American transformation when he renounced white supremacy, a dazzling, life-altering choice available to all of us right here, right now. And he became a leading voice for anarchism, socialism, workers' rights, and the 8-hour day. He married Lucy Parsons, a former slave who outlived him by half a century. Albert Parsons was hanged in 1887 after a quick show trial. The 3 surviving Haymarket defendants were pardoned in 1893 by Governor Altgeld, who was, incidentally, my favorite Illinois governor until George Ryan, a corrupt right-wing Republican and self-described pharmacist from Kankakee, declared himself an abolitionist and cleared death row in 2003, just hours before he left office, and 2 years for going to prison himself. Fraud, corruption, quiet money, the usual stuff. It was a magnificent action challenging capital punishment. And so now George Ryan is my favorite Illinois governor. Death penalty abolition, one of the great things about America. The death penalty itself, the shame of the nation. There's constant contradiction in Chicago, in America, always another incongruity or disparity, dispute or disruption, deviation to look into, always a challenge, an opposition, or an absurdity. And until the end of time, another pathway opening.
Your time, Mr. Ayers.
I'll just finish this paragraph. Standing directly next to the world as such, the world we see and the places we take for granted, stands another world. A possible world, a world that could be and should be but is not yet. And that's surely a good thing, because contradiction may save us. Nothing is settled once and for all. We're in the middle of the muddle right from the start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored and thrilled and moved to be back here at Dartmouth. I was many, many years ago a student sitting here in this very auditorium listening to speakers and debaters And it's a particular privilege to be back in Hanover having this debate on a really important topic. As you know, this has been a topic of some controversy and some sensitivity. Earlier, before this debate, we were discussing some possible security measures, and we decided that we should not have metal detectors for the audience, but we did have metal detectors for the two speakers. Now, what's so great about America? As I think about this topic, I hearken back to my days as a young boy growing up in India, coming fresh-faced at the age of 70 to the United States for the first time. And I've never lost the shock of my first impressions of America. In other words, I've now lived in America almost my whole life. I'm very much of an insider. I've long been an American citizen. But I still try to maintain a little bit that dual perspective that sees America from the outside and from the inside. I think this is really important because very often when we debate America, when we complain about America, we're doing it within the prism of America. We're doing it, in a sense, short-sightedly, in the manner of the fish condemning the surrounding water. We're using, I may say, a utopian standard. America's terrible. Compared to what? Well, compared to, the Garden of Eden. But that is never the immigrant perspective. The immigrant is always aware that in addition to this utopian standard, I don't reject it, there needs to be a comparative or historical standard that looks at America compared to some other place on earth. In other words, we have to keep our feet on the ground, or else we run the risk of kind of losing the human and realistic perspective of things. And so, for example, we've heard Mr. Ayers talk a little bit about social justice, dividing the pie, getting people's fair share. Never seemed to occur to him, how do you get a pie? Who made the pie? How do you make a pie grow? It's very easy to pull out the carving knife and start splitting. It's much more difficult to actually be the one who comes in with the pie. Now, I want to talk a little bit about America in the broadest scheme of things, to look at what America has meant in the world. If you think about human history, there are very few great inventions in history, truly great inventions. The invention of the wheel, the invention of fire. I think America is responsible for perhaps the greatest invention of all, the invention of wealth creation. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that for centuries and even millennia, nobody knew how to create stuff. Nobody knew how to create wealth. I remember as a kid, I would go to school and I'd have 10 marbles. And I'd look at the other kids and they had more marbles than I did. And I said to myself, how do I go from having 10 marbles to having 12 marbles? And I realized there was no way. None of us had any money. We had marbles. The only way for me to go from 10 marbles to 12 marbles was to take some other guy's 2 marbles. Historically, wealth was acquired through theft, through acquisition, and through conquest. How did countries get founded? Machiavelli says all great nations are founded in crime. You found a country by invading some other guy's country, killing the man who's running it, and declaring yourself to be the king. And that is how wealth was obtained for thousands of years. But the very idea that you can start with 10 marbles and end up with 15 marbles without stealing somebody else's marbles, that's the American idea. That is a very bold idea, that you can, in a sense, create something out of nothing. It's virtually divine. Now, the reason that this went unnoticed for centuries is that the people who create wealth, who are basically the science and technology guy on the one hand, and the entrepreneur or the merchant on the other, these two guys have been hated in virtually all cultures throughout human history. The merchant, the trader, the entrepreneur is a low man on the totem pole. If you look at, for example, Confucius, he says that the noble man knows what is virtuous. The low man knows what is profitable. In India, we have the caste system. Who's at the top? The Brahmin, the priest. And next, it's the royalty, the Kshatriyas, and then down the list you go until one step from the bottom, the hated untouchable. And right above him, the merchant, the trader. Low-life scum. The great Muslim thinker Ibn Khaldun in the Middle Ages says that looting is a better way, a more moral way to get wealth than trade. Why? Because he said trade is kind of effeminate. You're essentially slyly exploiting the wants of other people. He says looting is very manly. Because in looting, you have to beat a guy in open combat and take his stuff. So it appeals to the manly virtue of courage. I say all this because I wanted to convey, and by the way, this is true even today. I mean, even if you go to Europe, even now, inherited money is better than earned money. Why? Because inherited money is like manna from heaven, kind of the way Bill Ayers got money. Earned money means, from the European point of view, you probably had to run over some guys to get it. So it's looked down upon. Here's what I want to say. You have this totem pole with, if you will, the priest at the top, the merchant at the bottom. What America did, what the founders did, is they flipped it. They created a society that would be devoted to wealth creation through trade and technology and entrepreneurial capitalism. This was always an American idea, but it was always intended to be for the benefit of everybody. The Declaration of Independence does not say all Americans are created equal. It says all men. And so the American recipe was from the beginning intended to be made in America, but intended for global export. Everybody could benefit from this system. If you look at the original Constitution, by the way, before the Bill of Rights was added later, it only talks about one right. The right to patents and copyrights. Technology, invention, is the key to American success and American affluence. Now, what is the benefit of this? The benefit of this is absolutely stunning. When I first came to America, the most impressive thing to me was not that there was affluence in America. I already knew that. The most impressive thing to me was that the ordinary guy, and I'm not just talking about the smart guy, I'm talking about the not-so-smart guy. I'm not talking about the hard-working guy, I'm talking about the guy who didn't work that hard. What the greatness of America was that the not-so-smart, not-so-hard-working guy still had an amazingly good life. He had a nice home, he had 2 cars in the backyard. If he lived in California, he had a small pool. And I'm like, wow. I'm constantly comparing America with my friends in India. They have one guy who's been trying to emigrate to America now for I don't know how many years. The poor guy can never seem to get a visa. So finally I said to him, I said, why are you so eager to come to America? He goes, Dinesh, I just want to move to a country where the poor people are fat. Now, what's he getting at? What he's getting at is the phenomenon, if you will, of mass prosperity. Of the ordinary guy having it fantastically well. And that's true. But I want to go beyond that to suggest that what America really offers is not just comfort and wealth and the ability to live well. It offers you the chance to write the script of your own life. Not long ago, I asked myself, how has my life changed by coming to the United States? How would it be different had I stayed, say, in India? Now, I grew up in a middle-class family, and I didn't have great luxury, but neither did I lack for anything. In coming to America, my life, is it better off materially? Yes. But it's not a radical difference. Actually, my life has changed more in other ways. Had I stayed in India, chances are I would have probably lived in a 5 or 10 mile radius of where I was born. Would have married a girl of my identical socio-economic and caste and cultural background. I would have become an engineer like my dad, or a doctor like one of my uncles. I would have had a whole set of opinions on a bunch of subjects that could be predicted in advance. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is my destiny would to a large degree have been given to me. Not that I would have no choice, but the choice is within a confined parameter. The beauty of America is that in this country we have the ability to write the script of our own life. We are, in a sense, in the driving seat of our own future. And our biggest decisions in life are made by us. America creates this sense of possibility. And out of that, you can become an activist, a community organizer. In a sense, what are you doing? You are living off the great capitalist explosion of wealth that you didn't even create. And who's doing that? Most of you. If you look at your life, you're actually living out the dream of the early Karl Marx. The early Karl Marx said, it would be great to live in a society where there was not a whole lot of work to be done, in which we can sit around, maybe do a little bit of work in the morning, and then we could do some art in the afternoon, and some intellectual banter in the evening, and then some artistic expression. And in a way, he was describing Dartmouth. But what he kind of missed is, how do you sort of get a Dartmouth? Who pays for it? Where does all this abundance come from? There's nothing like Dartmouth virtually anywhere else in the world. All the foreign students from everywhere want to come to places like this one. Why? Because they actually represent a fulfillment not just of the right-wing, if you will, capitalist dream, but of the left-wing, progressive dream of self-fulfillment and personal realization. Now, I want to turn for a moment, without losing sight, of what is happening to the American dream. What is happening to the American dream, I fear, is it is beginning to be shrunken in America, and incredibly, it is beginning to be seized upon elsewhere in the world. We are losing our own dream. It's going to other people. And if you look around the world, what you see is countries like Brazil, China, India, Russia, coming up. They're growing at 5 times the rate of the United States. Why? We have taught them the secret of wealth creation. For a long time, we sort of tried the Bill Ayers formula. We tried to go over there and build homes. We tried to go over there and do stuff for them. We tried to go over there and lend them money, the IMF loans, all of which were a complete waste of time and money. Well-meaning, and admittedly for the moral edification of the people doing it, but of no real value to the people on the ground. Finally, the Indians and the Chinese had an insight, and it could be called very crudely the advantage of backwardness. What's the advantage of backwardness? We don't have a whole bunch of money, but we do have a whole bunch of people. And if we can get those people, not to sit around doing nothing, talking to anthropologists or social workers, but making stuff that other people actually want to buy, we will in fact take over the world market. And that's really what's happened. The American dream, our dream, has now become a global dream. This is the great gift that America has given and is giving to the world. It has actually been globalization. I'm talking about global technological capitalism has been far and away the greatest anti-poverty program ever created. All the concoctions of Jane Addams and frankly Mother Teresa and every government handout and Barack Obama pale next to the simple ingenuity of the iPhone in a small Indian village where some female entrepreneur is using it to sell a bicycle. In other words, what has delivered the goods for people is not ultimately social agitation. Rather, it is the very American sense of taking nothing, sand, and making it into silicon. It is that ingenuity, the making of the pie, that's far more profound an act than simply saying, what do I do to divide the pie? Everybody has an opinion on that. Now, I want to say a word about American foreign policy. Bill hasn't talked a whole lot about it, but I do want to say that American foreign policy, to me, viewed as a whole, has actually made the world much better and much safer. Now, there are all kinds of exceptions and stupid stuff, and the Vietnam War, and the war in Iraq, and this and that. and I grant it all. But just step back and ask yourself this. What would the 20th century or the last 100 years have been like if there never was an America? What would have been the outcome of World War I? Or World War II? Or the Cold War? What would the world be like if America sort of never existed? For all our blunders and for all our self-interest, by the way, democratic societies have every right to be self-interested. We elect governments to look out for us. The question is not, is America self-interested, as if that was a crime, but in being self-interested, is America making the world better or worse? We self-interestedly got into World War II. We didn't even care about Hitler. It took the bombing in Pearl Harbor to get us into it. Self-interest.
2 minutes.
But that self-interest nevertheless got rid of Nazi Germany and Japanese imperialism. We fought the Cold War for self-interest, sure. But who would deny that at the end of it, the world is much better and freer? The Russians have all kinds of problems, but nobody wants to restore the old nomenclatura, the old Communist Party. So American power has been ultimately, I think, a great boon for the world. It has, in a way, kept the world secure. Why? For this reason. What America invented is the idea of wealth creation as an alternative to conquest. Frankly, most people in the rest of the world believe in both. If China today or Russia had America's power, they'd be using it for wealth creation. We taught them that. They would also be using it for conquest. What America can do for the world now is show the importance of transitioning from the one to the other. It's another way of saying that American foreign policy is not about acquiring real estate. People tell me, well, America invaded Grenada, and America invaded Iraq, and America invaded Afghanistan. And my point is, hey, if America invaded all those places, why don't we own them? The truth of the matter is America got in, America gets out. We don't want to own anybody else's real estate. Our foreign policy can be summed up in 2 phrases. Trade with us and don't bomb us. And that's it. So, there are all kinds of criticisms to be made of America. And I will be happy to make them as well as the next guy. But I think taking the global perspective, taking the perspective of history and the comparative perspective, I end up with the words of Jeane Kirkpatrick, who said it many years ago, sometimes we have to face the truth about ourselves, no matter how pleasant it is. Thank you very much.
So many strong men set up, it's hard to know where to begin. Nobody said America's the most terrible place. But there are a couple of assertions that you have to take on faith that are astonishing. One is the idea that America's great invention was wealth creation, not based on theft at all. What about the theft of the entire continent? That was a theft. That doesn't mean 90% of the residents who lived here were murdered, and that was a part of it too. So I'm going to go back for a minute to the question of contradiction. You know, and I was saying, I said in the opening that contradiction may save us, and I think we need to see things as contradictory. But I find a real arid kind of lack of imagination when you assert that the only thing we can do is see America in relation to someplace else, rather than to fire our imaginations to imagine standing right next to the world as such, a world that could be or a world that should be, and committing ourselves to work toward that better world. We don't have to say, oh, Jamaica's better, that's what we want. That's not the point. The point is, are we perfect? No, we are not. Can we improve? Yes, we can. How do we do that? So I'm going back to contradiction. And I want to say just 3 things really quickly. One, just to note a couple of other contradictions. There are the muckrakers and the whistleblowers and the truth tellers from Upton Sinclair to Ida B. Wells. to Daniel Ellsberg and Jeremy Hammond and Aaron Swartz, all three Chicagoans, to Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. They're what's so great about America. They're the citizen activists who brought us the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts and are largely responsible for the fact that you live in a country where you can turn on the faucet and drink clean water, unless you live in West Virginia, sorry, or one of the fracked up states. They're what's so great about America. They're the abolitionists, Frederick Douglass and his friend Captain John Brown, each buried not far from here. Wendell Phillips, General Harriet Tubman, with that necessary pistol in her pocket. And there are the feminist fighters like from Seneca Falls on, Sojourner Truth, the Grimke sisters, and so on. So let me ask you two quick questions, just taking those last two movements. Are you all against slavery? God, I know I'm at Dartmouth, but really? Really? Could I ask again, are you against slavery? A little louder. Okay, thank you. If you were against slavery 150 years ago, you'd have been against the founders, the Constitution, the Bible, your parents, your friends, and common sense. But let's face it, we all would have been against slavery then, right? We're good abolitionists now, 150 years later. You're all for a woman's right to vote, right? Men? Okay. We're all for a woman's right to vote now, but 100 years ago, if you'd been for a woman's right to vote, you'd have been against the founders, the Bible, your preacher, the Constitution, and the law. So let's agree, we would have been those good people. But the fact is that it takes an imagination to step outside. You don't look at slavery and say, well, we're better than these other countries. No, you say, this is something that needs improving. And that's how you begin to become an active citizen. You jump into the contradictions as they are. You make a stand for human beings, for human freedom, for justice, yes, for social justice. And in the last 100 or 200 years, the people who've actually made a difference in this country, the people who've actually inspired us to do better than we would have done, not by looking elsewhere, but by looking at ourselves. The people who really made a difference are the America's radicals, from Jane Addams to Emma Goldman, from John Brown and Harriet Tubman to Eugene Debs, and the legacy continued with Ella Baker, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and right up to today, with the efforts of James Tindwa and Karen Lewis, Grace Lee Boggs and I-Jen Poo, Bill McKibben and Michelle Alexander, on and on. But as Ella Baker said of Martin Luther King, Martin didn't make the movement made Martin. We all have plenty to do to put our shoulders on the wheel of improving our lives and the lives of others.
Debate has taken a very interesting turn because we sometimes hear the phrase American exceptionalism. I think one thing that you've been hearing today is that in a way, we're talking about two types of exceptionalism. For example, if I were to talk about great Americans, I would talk about the wealth creators, Benjamin Franklin, Edison, Steve Jobs. I think that those three guys, collectively, have done more than all the redistributors combined. I'm not saying there isn't room for both. I'm just trying to put priority where it belongs. Now, when it comes to tough issues, how do we get the country? Slavery. It's time to talk a little bit of sense. And I think we're in a generation now and at a moment now when we can do that without mere sloganeering. 90% of American Indians were murdered, genocide. Actually, that's not true. The white man came to America and brought with him, unwittingly, a whole bunch of diseases, malaria, smallpox, and on it goes. The vast, vast majority of Indians contracted the plagues and died. And it wiped out the majority of them, and this was a tragedy. But it was no more of a genocide than when the Black Plague and the bubonic plague swept across Europe, wiping out 1/3 of the population of Europe, and that came from Asia. And I don't see the Europeans submitting reparations or genocide proposals in the UN. Why? Because they have the sense to recognize that this is part of the tragedy of history. Human beings have carried with them diseases to which people had no immunities at the time. This is not to excuse broken treaties or any of the rest of it, but it is a way of demanding a certain intellectual precision when we talk about these things. Now, slavery. Isn't it a fact that the founders allowed slavery? It is. And why did they do it? Because had they not allowed it, there would be no way they could have had a union. 12 of the 13 original states had slaves. Certainly the southern states, but most of the northern states would not have joined the union had there been an attempt to forbid it at the outset. So what Lincoln said is the founders declared the right to freedom so that the enforcement could follow when the circumstances permitted. And in fact, 300,000 white boys from the North died to end slavery, securing for the African American a freedom that he was not strong enough or in a position to secure for himself. So I'm really glad somebody ran the Underground Railroad, but I don't know why nobody mentions those 300,000 white soldiers who had nothing to gain and who gave their lives to end slavery. And finally, when Martin Luther King said in the 60s, I am submitting a promissory note and I'm demanding that it be cashed, I was kind of waiting for the Southern segregationists to say, what note? We didn't make any promises to you. But in fact, Martin Luther King was not appealing to a promise made by the Southern segregationists. He was appealing to the Declaration of Independence. And here is an amazing fact. Martin Luther King was appealing to a charter and a principle articulated by a Southern slaveholding planter, Thomas Jefferson, which is another way of saying that far from repudiating the founding, what Martin Luther King was doing was claiming the promise of the founding. The founders declared the right so that the enforcement could follow when the circumstances permitted. This is a way of saying to Americans that we can look at our history with all the passion and tragedy built into it, and still take a certain justifiable pride, not just in the agitation, but also in the original principles which the founders got right from the start. Thank you. This is a cross-examination period, and the way it works is I pose a question to Mr. Ayers, you answer and pose one to me, so we're going to go a little bit back and forth. My first question to you is, you started out as a revolutionary, and, well, you started out a little bit, frankly, in the Bin Laden mode. You tried to bomb the Pentagon, you tried to bomb the U.S. Capitol. Here's my question to you. You sounded totally different today. You talked about teaching, you talked about being an educator, you talked about Socratic doubt and wonder. So my question is, what happened to that old revolutionary? Is he still alive, or has he thrown in the towel?
No, I think that I actually feel that I still am a revolutionary in this. If by revolutionary you mean, if what you mean by revolutionary is having a fully worked out program by which we can kind of imagine a different world and overthrow a government and move forward. No, I'm not that. But if by that you mean somebody who's willing to dive into the contradictions, try to make sense out of them, try to fight for more peace, more justice, more balance, more sustainability, and being willing to live with ambiguity and complexity and try to move forward, sure, I still consider myself someone who sees the need for a fundamental change. And I'll give you one example. To me, the struggle against white supremacy, which I invited everybody to join, is a struggle that still goes on. It's not over. It's not ended. It's a struggle that still goes on, and it takes different forms. It's not slavery. It's not Jim Crow. But the destruction of voting rights, the mass incarceration, and the overrepresentation of black men in prisons, that is white supremacy today. That's what we should be fighting. 2.5 million of our fellow citizens in prison? What is that about? 5% of the world's population imprisoning 20% of the world's prisoners? It's an outrage. We should change it.
Well, I have to agree with you that the lock-em-up impulse is getting a little out of hand these days.
It's very out of hand. And but now my question to you. You've written that you've written, among other things, and you implied it again today, that, you know, the slaves are dead. And let's face it, the descendants of slaves are better off. And you said many times, I'm not submitting a note to get reparations from the British because I'm better off for the whole enterprise. Of course, there's a lot of ways to think about that. For example, you might have taken an ESL class, and there's a lot of ways to imagine coming to the West besides the slaughter of millions. But in any case, my question to you is, many people say that the State of Israel, a catalyst for the creation of the State of Israel, was the Holocaust. Do you have the same opinion about the Holocaust, that it was in some sense worth it because look at the end?
Well, the argument about the Holocaust is this. I'm not saying that the Jews are better off for the Holocaust because they got Israel out of it. A completely different way to put it would be that the moral anguish about what happened in the death camps did help, in fact, to create political support for the State of Israel.
Right.
Now, the point about colonization, though, and slavery is a little different. Last year, I believe it was, a year before, the Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh went to Oxford, and he gave a speech that if he had given it when I was a kid, he would probably have been strung up on the streets of Bombay. But what he basically said was, he said, look, Gandhi had a dream of wiping a tear off every Indian face. And he said, now it is global technological capitalism that is helping to realize that dream. Not India's 40 years of socialism, but technological capitalism. But he said something else, and this was the most controversial thing he said. He said, we have benefited, we are in a position, India, to take advantage of global capitalism because of the legacy of empire. That's the key word, the legacy of empire. And what he was saying is that although the British Empire was very hard and imposed indignities on people who lived under it, their descendants, modern Indians now, speak English and have technical institutes and also have an infrastructure that enables them, not to mention democracy and separation of powers and checks of balances and contracts and courts of law. You walk into Indian courtrooms and you see dark-skinned guys in white wigs. That's the legacy of empire. The Indians could take off the wigs, the British have gone home, we could stop speaking English, we could go back to the old way, but nobody even proposes that. Why? Because there's a recognition that although empire, no one's saying the British came with good intentions, but it is a way of saying that colonialism, for better or worse, was the transmission belt that brought some of these Western values that you and I now both affirm to India.
So you are saying, in a sense, that as bad as the Holocaust was, it helped, because we should be grateful for the creation of Israel, and this was the transmission belt.
5 minutes.
Absolutely not. I think on the cost-benefit analysis, I would say absolutely not. The State of Israel is a good thing to have. You may not have needed a State of Israel if the Jews were safe in Europe. So it would be preposterous to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the same is true of slavery. It's preposterous to say that it was a good thing.
It is. I'm not saying it's a good thing.
Well, what you said is that the descendants are better off for having, for that institution having
The descendants
existed.
were not enslaved. So that's the key point. Meaning,
Except
I'm thinking of
that white supremacy still exists, and white supremacy still expresses itself in all kinds of institutional ways. It's not a matter of individual racism. It's a matter of structures by which people as a group are kept down, and that's something that still exists. And as I say, we can all commit ourselves to fighting that system.
And I'm not saying no, but all I'm saying is, I'm saying what Frederick Douglass said. Frederick Douglass stood up before an abolition society and basically said, I will not celebrate the 4th of July.
Exactly.
It's not mine, it's your 4th of July. The 4th of July is an emblem of white supremacy. And then as the Civil War began, Lincoln, who actually took Douglass at his word, that he didn't belong in America and he wanted to have a country of his own, basically said, okay, I'm going to now look to find where we can relocate the freed slaves after the war. And Lincoln had 7 or 8 places that he was actually actively sending emissaries to check out where freed slaves could have a country of their own. But by this time, it was Frederick Douglass himself who said, no, we don't want to go anywhere. For all the problems, we are 100% American. We want to stay right here. This is our home, and that's all I'm saying. I'm simply saying that American Indians, blacks, Indians, all of us have a choice today in a free society to live in the old way. American Indians could say on the reservations, we're not going to have cell phones. We're going to live the old way. We're going to chase bison. We're going to hunt. We're going to live the National Geographic life. That's how it used to be, and that's what we value. We're going to make it as if Columbus never came here.
Who's arguing this? I mean, you're making this straw man. Who's arguing this? You've got a great argument against somebody, but I don't know who it is.
That's my point. The reason no one argues it is everyone has voted with their feet to live in Western modernity. Everybody wants cell phones. Nobody even thinks of this stuff.
But everyone has not voted with their feet to live in a permanent war economy. Everyone has not voted with their feet to say, look, here we have $1 trillion military budget. That's wrong. That's outrageous. And the idea that we go over and help people and then we leave, that's the nature of empire is now not going over and holding the land. It's a neo kind of empire. It's we control the resources. We control the way money is spent. In 2010, the taxpayers, us, gave $300 billion to private corporations like Halliburton in no-bid contracts, and that was the biggest corporate welfare scheme in the world. That was the biggest one that's ever been executed, and that is going on regularly. This notion that somehow corporations are persons, and that Walmart is a person, and that's the end of our political system of democracy. That's the end of it, because money buys political office, it buys judgeships, it buys redistricting, and that's where we're living, and we should resist it.
Look, I will admit, there's no question that the government runs all kinds of rackets with private industry, and it does it in the corporate sector, in the defense sector. I think you also have to admit in the social welfare sector. There are all kinds of alliances that government makes with groups to privilege them or give them advantages. Here's the point I want to make about foreign policy. I think the Iraq War, in retrospect, was very stupid. There is no reason...
But you supported it at the time, remember?
I supported it at the time because I believed there were weapons of mass destruction. I don't understand why you should...
Why did you believe that? It was so transparently false. They stood up in front of... I mean, it was so obvious, and everybody knew it. At least 50% of the American people knew it, and every scholar knew it.
No, they didn't. First of all, here's the problem. The problem is that Saddam Hussein at the time was behaving as if he had nuclear weapons. The UN said to him, send it. If he had no nuclear weapons, the UN said he should have told the inspectors, come on in, take a look. I don't have them. But Saddam was acting like he had them. But that being said, it's inexcusable to invade a country when you don't know. It's like it's inexcusable to kick in someone's house and go in if you don't know they have drugs in the toilet.
Even then,
if you don't know, you shouldn't do it. Now.
But you're saying,
I know you're looking a little uncomfortable.
You didn't understand.
That analogy.
You're saying you didn't. But we do know that North Korea has nuclear weapons. Should we go kick their door in?
Of course not.
Of course we should, by your logic.
No. Let me qualify that logic. Someone once said that, what do you call a dictator that has nuclear weapons? And somebody said, you call that person Sir. In other words, when people have nuclear weapons, you have to really treat them with kid gloves. That's kind of why we didn't want Saddam to get them.
But you said we thought that he had them, but we knew he didn't have them.
We did not know that.
Oh, all the intelligence knew that.
All right. Let me make a bigger point.
We're at time.
Bigger point. I'll make it very briefly. You talk about all the money we wasted on all these foreign expeditions, and to a large degree I agree. But I do think that one point comes clear from that. We did not go to those countries to steal their stuff. The fact of the matter is, we have spent a whole bunch of money in Iraq. We could have taken it right back from them in oil. We could have basically taken over their oil fields and taken the revenue for them for as long as we can hold them. But Bush, the hated Bush, left Iraq and handed the keys to the oil fields to the Iraqis and said, guys, it's your oil. Sell it, burn it, do what you will with it. This Iraq war cost us a whole bunch of money. And stupid though it is for a country to spend that much money, it's not evil. It's a country that's trying to do something good in Iraq.
It's not stupid. Trying to do something good, I think you're dreaming. It's not stupid to do what they did if you're giving the money to Halliburton and Lockheed Martin. That's what they did. Billions of dollars were transferred, taxpayer dollars were transferred to those operations by these very manipulative, lying... Look, one of the things we should congratulate ourselves for is the U.S. always lies us into war. It was true in Vietnam, it was true in Iraq. The reason is we like to think of ourselves as a peace-loving people. If they said we're going in for the oil, we'd say no, don't do it. But instead they say we're going in for democracy, we're going in... And look at the democracy we have now in Iraq. That was great, nation building. We were freeing the women. right? And look at what we've got in Afghanistan, and why, you know, and Iraq, and again, over and over and over. This is the nature of empire today, and it is about resources. That's why you see the wars and the invasions and the military bases, hundreds of American military bases all over the world, mostly guarding the sector of oil.
Well, the military bases and the U.S. Navy keeps open all the commercial traffic in the world. The reason that stuff comes over here safely, isn't boarded by pirates and bombed, is because the U.S. Navy is keeping the lanes open. Look,
And that's time.
okay, I think let's go to questions and we can pick up this theme that way.
Yes, we'd like to invite anyone in the audience who might have a question to please line up. We have two microphones with two individuals manning them. If you have questions, please come to the front, and they'll take them one at a time. Michelle, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure.
You ready?
Hello, my name is Michael Walsh. I'm from Troy, New Hampshire. Mr. Ayers, I lived through your times. I was in Vietnam in '68, the Tet Offensive in the 101st Airborne Division. I came back. Wait. You got to hear the other side. I came back and I was at the moratorium in Boston Common. I heard Abby Hoffman speak. We marched down Mass Ave and took over Harvard Square. I had more tear gas that night than I've ever had in my life. And you took an armed stance against the United States government. And I might not agree with it, but it took courage to do that. How do you still feel about the right to bear arms? Do I have a right to bear arms, or is it only the government that gets to have guns?
You're asking me about the Second Amendment, I assume? Yeah. I think that I think we've gone way too far, and that we need to find a way to take back some of the extreme kind of gun ownership that exists. It's not a question of do I think I think we should disarm, and I think that means that we should absolutely allow serious background checks, to allow serious kind of limits on what people are sold. The idea that somehow everybody has a right to a machine gun and that's protected by the Second Amendment is pure folly, and it's ridiculous, and it's leading us in a very dangerous direction.
Mr. D'Souza, would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, we have a Bill of Rights, and I think it is sort of odd. Imagine if you used exactly that kind of rhetoric with regard to the First Amendment. And you said something like, well, I think speaking is kind of an okay kind of thing to do, but I think we should all limit our speech, and I think we should all be really careful of what we say, and if the government wants to run background checks on us to clear what... People would say, are you out of your mind? Why do we have a First Amendment? So I'm not for Uzis, I'm not for machine guns, but I'm saying let's extend some of the same respect to the Second Amendment that we automatically, instinctively extend to the First.
Yes, but the truth is we do debate the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. We debate it, and the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, has decided that a corporation is a person, that giving goo-gobs of money to candidates is protected by free speech. That is something that I think is also absurd, and we should debate it. These things are debated.
I'm not putting it outside the bounds of debate. I'm just saying that there is a presumptive vote in favor of the free speech and a heavy burden to be met to curtail it. And I'm just saying it's got to be the same way for the right to bear arms as well.
Paul?
Hello, Mr. D'Souza. This question is actually directed at you. So I actually saw 2016. It definitely made me think a lot. But this question is more about some of the things that have changed since you were at Dartmouth College. So Dartmouth College has made some incredible advances for LGBT students. This fall, they're opening an LGBT affinity house. Dartmouth is hosting IVQ, which is a large queer conference for the Ivy League. And in addition, D-Gala, Dartmouth Gay and Lesbian Alumni Association, is holding their 30th reunion. Many people consider your time as editor-in-chief at the Dartmouth Review the lowest point for LGBT students at Dartmouth College. A lot of people talk about how, as the editor of the Review, you outed students in the review. You went to GSX meetings at the time. People have talked about the time. Kevin Corn wrote a great article in Mother Jones about how you would go through letters that students had written, LGBT students had written. You would publish confidential information in the review. And I wanted to ask, number one, what do you have against queer people, and when is that going to change, and why do you have these views on them?
Great.
First of all, I have to say I'm really kind of amazed that my activities as an undergraduate, which were actually in the late 70s, early 80s, are being discussed. The good news about it, I'll tell you, is that I was there and Mother Jones was not. Here's what I mean. When I began to become a successful author in the 90s, many, many years after I went to Dartmouth, left-wing groups on the campus created, I would call it, an urban legend history of the Dartmouth Review, looking back at what we supposedly did and basically fabricating stuff and handing it out and relying on Chinese whispers on the left to preserve these legends. So, for example, none of them can name any students that were named in the review. You'll notice that this is all just, this is what he allegedly did. I didn't do it. I've never been to it was then called a GSA. Never been to their meeting, never taken any of their files. At one point we wrote an article on college funding for the Gay Students Association, and in that article we mentioned the 4 officers who had applied for college funding, and we noted that in their application they had not described any intellectual activities, or were basically using the money for parties. So the thrust of the article was, college fees go to fund intellectual and cultural groups. They don't go to fund, basically, beer kegs, and they don't go to fund recreational activity. And the question was, why is the college doing this? Now, you can agree or disagree, but the point I'm trying to make is the Mother Jones recapitulation, 30 years old, bears no actual resemblance to the facts. So I'm happy to defend what I said, and quite frankly, you know, I've done some sophomoric things when I was in college. My main defense, I was at that time indeed a sophomore. But I don't want to be held accountable for things I didn't do.
Okay, but so you were misunderstood, and you have they have the facts wrong. Will you now give a full-throated endorsement of queer rights?
Well, I don't know what a full-throated endorsement of queer rights means.
Say it loudly. I mean, I've read your stuff, and it's got homophobia written all over it. I've read, for example, your attack on French intellectuals as people who would trust men who carry handbags. So I hear this in your. Yes, you said that.
I wouldn't give a full-throated endorsement of French intellectuals.
So again, that wasn't when you were at Dartmouth, but nevertheless, I think the young man has a question, and the question is, can you now say queer rights, gay, lesbian, transgendered rights are fundamental to your view of what freedom would look like today in America?
I'm a firm believer that we are all in this country a minority of one. I don't believe in racial rights. I don't believe in rights that accrue to groups. I believe that as individuals we have all the rights that we're entitled to under the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, gay and lesbians included.
Amazing. Amazing. So you don't see groups. You're like Stephen Colbert. You don't see groups. You just see people. You don't see race.
No,
you don't see gender. You don't see, those aren't in your, those categoricals aren't there. And if a group of people you could prove were categorically kept down because of their identity, for example, as gay, you would oppose that.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Would you affirm right now, as a group, the fundamentalist evangelical Christian rights?
Affirm what?
Let me clarify.
Affirm what?
Let me clarify.
They're there. Some of them are here.
Let me clarify. Among the Dartmouth faculty, and this would probably be true of all the Ivy League, self-described professing evangelical Christians are smaller in number and probably in proportion to blacks, Hispanics, gays and lesbians, any of these so-called minority groups. But they are the smallest minority of all groups, so presumably evangelical Christian rights would mean the right to have a group, the right to be recognized as a group, the right to be considered part of diversity, the right to be considered for affirmative action, the right to have the university go out and recruit people to make sure that their perspective is well respected, sensitivity sessions to make sure that students don't make derogatory comments toward evangelical Christians.
Look,
would you affirm all that?
Look, I don't think... Where are the evangelical Christians demanding that? I think you're making this up. I think this is another straw man.
I'm making it up?
You're saying that they're a minority that are oppressed. Show me where that minority is oppressed. Maybe
Okay.
be small in number. Where are they? And what is the oppression? They can't get tenure? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Conservatives, evangelical Christians have tenure all over America. So what are you talking about?
What I'm talking about
And he's
is,
talking about a group
Right.
that was systematically discriminated against.
I would submit that by and large, if you were up before the tenure committee today and you had one applicant who was, let's say, a champion of queer theory and another who was an outspoken defender of evangelical Christianity, the queer theorist would be far more confident in speaking up, saying, this is who I am, and would expect that to actually accrue to his or her benefit, whereas the evangelical Christian would do everything he or she could to suppress that, to be quiet about it, because this is the acceptable bigotry of the Ivy League, and you know it.
You've made up this narrative, but there's no truth to it. The fact is, and you obviously know nothing about how tenure committees work. It would depend on publications. It would depend on peer review. It wouldn't depend on whether you were popular or not popular. You're wrong about that. And it's not true at Dartmouth, and it's not true at Harvard, and it's not true at Illinois.
Mr. D'Souza, let me maybe clarify my question.
Well, perhaps we should move on. In fairness, I just want to have other questions. This is not a debate about, this is a debate about America broadly. I just don't want to get too caught in the bushes on this.
We
So there's a
respect
long
your
line.
question, but in the interest of fairness for other people who have questions as well, we want to move on.
Yes, let's change it up a little bit. I attended a public hearing this morning regarding a bill called HCR 10 that was introduced to the New Hampshire State Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs Board. This concurrent resolution applies to the Congress of the United States to call for a convention under Article 5 of the United States Constitution, to have a constitutional convention. I not only would like the speakers to think about this issue and reply, but the audience as well. What are we going to do about our Constitution?
You know, in history, there are very few times in history where there has been, almost out of nowhere, I would say semi-miraculous events. Greece in the 5th century BC, out of nowhere. Pericles, Socrates, Aristophanes, theater, philosophy, all congregates together, and nobody knows what was there before, and there has not been a whole lot after. Elizabethan England, Germany in the 19th century, philosophy, music. I think the American founding is one such moment. A remarkable group of people with deep insight came together, and they gave us a formula for wealth creation. And it is no rebuttal to say we're living 200 years later. It's because the principles of the founding are as relevant today as they ever were. So what do we do? It terrifies me to think that, for example, we can have a constitutional convention now and have a group of comparable wisdom. Basically, you can say update the founding. More likely, we don't need to redo the founding. What we need to do is live by the principles of the founding.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the Constitution is there to be changed, and it does need to be changed. We need, for example, one of the things we need to fight for is the right of every person to vote. And one of the things that astonishes me is how much effort goes in to suppressing the vote, to trying not to let people vote. And this comes largely from the right, but it comes from a lot of other directions too. There are many ways that suppression happens. We should fight for and believe in universal suffrage. That's not in the Constitution, but that's the kind of constitutional change that we should make. Everyone should have a right to vote, and everyone's access to the ballot should be unrestricted. And we don't have that situation now. In fact, I mean, we have felony disenfranchisement, and if you look at felony disenfranchisement, it follows the entire, struggle, this entire history of the civil rights struggle. The civil rights struggle was a struggle for justice, but it had a couple of tactical things that matter. One was integrating the schools, and one was access to the ballot. In both of those great struggles, we are not we have not moved forward. Access to the ballot was undone through felony disenfranchisement. And what we ought to do is we ought to fight to extend the ballot. And the other, parenthetically, the other suppression tactic is money. Money in politics takes away your right to vote. It's not one person, one vote. It's Monsanto with 10,000 votes. We got to get rid of the Electoral College. That would be a good thing to do in a constitutional convention. This is an absurdity held over from slavery. So there are things that we need to do, but I would think the right would join with the left and say every human being, every citizen has a right to vote. And that means if you have a felony, you don't lose your citizenship. In fact, while you're in prison, ballots ought to be brought to you. You're still a citizen. Why shouldn't you vote? Why not? Why do you get disqualified from being a citizen because you committed a crime? That's ridiculous. We should extend the vote, we should do away with gerrymandering, and we should get phony money out of politics.
We're about halfway through.
Hi, my name is Adam Hahn. I'm the head of the Atheist Humanist Agnostics on campus here. One quick comment was easily I can name the evangelical groups on campus outweigh both the secularist groups as well as the LGBTQ groups. I mean, just in one of them, they probably outnumber all of us. So the idea that there's less of them and they're a persecuted minority, I just think is absolutely unfounded.
Remember, I said faculty.
Faculty, of course, but... And the question, though, that I have is, you were talking a little bit about the eroding of religion, politics, modern-day thought, giving us things like slavery, get rid of the things like slavery as well as giving us women's rights. Do we need to further go along this process of erosion of religious priorities as well as governmental priorities within that in order to make it better? Or...
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Say it again.
Please forgive. Do we need to erode religion a little further or government policies a little bit further in order to help us move along the social scale, as you were saying, with women's rights as well as slavery?
I think he's saying, should government take a tougher stance against religion to limit, presumably, what seems to be religious curtailment of
public policy. I would not want to say government.
Pardon me?
Public policy. I would not want to say
government.
government.
Give me an example of what you mean. What do you mean?
You gave the example of slavery as well as women's rights, saying that religious ideas were covering both of them, as though they were upholding both of them. Do I have that wrong?
I said religious ideas.
There was one of 4 categories you gave, saying that that was one of the things that people 100 years ago or 50 years ago were supporting in order to go.
What I said, yes. Now I'm with you. What I said was, if you were against slavery 150 years ago, you would have been against the Bible, the Constitution, the law, the founders, and your preacher. So that's what I said, because those forces were all in favor of slavery, and the anti-slavery movement was a tiny minority until the Civil War, and then it became a mass movement. So yes.
One quick clarification then. I'm trying to say, do we need to go further in order to get the more liberal rights eroding these types of ideas more in order to get further along the social scale?
I mean, I think we need to extend. I think we need to fight to extend the realm of human freedom. And frankly, I think, in the 5,000 years history of states, it's only been very, very recently that states have done anything to extend the realm of human freedom, and they've only done it when there's been power from below. They've never done it on their own free will, never. And so it's always about building the kinds of social movements that envision a different world, and we fight for that.
See, these debates make no sense if you don't talk in somewhat specific terms. My argument would be that we have interpreted the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment about religion in such a way as to make religious believers, in effect, into second-class citizens. And here's what I mean. Let's say tomorrow somebody were to say, let's put a statue of Voltaire right next to the U.S. Capitol. There's a procedure for that to happen. People would debate the legacy of Voltaire. One question would be, how much influence has he had on America? Has he made a real difference? Do we really admire him? The debate would be completely on the merits. Voltaire yes or Voltaire no. On the other hand, if someone said, let's put a statue of Moses on the U.S. Capitol, people would say, you can't do that. It violates the First Amendment. Now, Moses has had actually far more influence on our society, our culture, our laws, our history, our Constitution than has Voltaire. But the point is it would not even be debated, because Moses would be tossed out without consideration as somebody whose very name violates the First Amendment. And I'm saying this is discriminatory against believers.
I think that's nuts. I think you're crazy. Here you are saying the Establishment Clause, you're now wanting to reinterpret that, but the Second Amendment you genuflected in front of. So it's kind of bizarre that as I said, I think they're all debatable. But the idea that somehow religious people are discriminated against is just flatly not true. This is a country that absolutely recognizes your beliefs, and you're allowed to practice them anywhere. What you're not allowed to do is to bring them into government and have government say, this is the correct one. So Voltaire and Moses are completely different. Although there was that court in Georgia that had the Ten Commandments in a statue.
So pause.
Read the Ten Commandments and see if that makes any sense for a secular democracy.
You're saying I'm allowed to have my religious beliefs in private, but I'm not allowed to impose them on the public square. I ask you, are you allowed to impose your secular beliefs on the public square?
No, you're allowed to have them in the public square. You're not allowed to have the government establish that as the right one.
Okay.
And that's the difference. It's a huge difference. Not only are you allowed to have them in the public square, in our political debates, every candidate almost has to bow down and say, oh, I go to church every Sunday. It's ridiculous. Why can't he be a candidate completely credible as an out atheist?
I think he should be, but in a society in which there is the consent of the governed, the reason politicians do that is they happen to have religious people whose votes they want. If they have the guts to say, I'm an atheist and I don't care whether religious people vote for me, that would show a little bit of courage. But if you want religious people votes and you then want to pander to them, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for you.
It's fine to pander to them. My point is that you're making up a false parallel here. Voltaire's just a person. We can decide whether we like him or not. Moses, if you put a statue of Moses or Jesus someplace, that would be endorsing, not in the public square, in the government
government arena.
You're not allowed to, and you shouldn't be.
Right. So here the clouds part, and what we're seeing is that religious figures and religious views, because the reason these people are important is what they said, are singled out. And in a sense, so the Supreme Court has not gone your way on this, because while they used to interpret the Establishment Clause as meaning religion is banned, but atheism and secularism is fine in the public square, now the Supreme Court has been more nuanced. So for example, let's look at Dartmouth. If people go to Dartmouth College, and let's assume Dartmouth were a state institution, because let's make it the public square. And you said, I wanted to start an atheist society. College goes, wonderful, we recognize you, here's $2,000. Then somebody goes to the college and says, we want to start a society for Catholic Christians. According to him, that's a state activity.
No.
Because it's religious.
But doesn't Dartmouth have a Catholic group?
But Dartmouth's a private school. I was saying in my example,
the University of Illinois has a Catholic center right in the middle of its campus.
Exactly. So
it's allowed.
So the principle I'm arguing for is a non-discriminatory principle in which believers and non-believers alike share, without discrimination, access to the public square. If somebody wants Moses up there, we debate it on the merits, the same as Voltaire.
I would like to ask Dr. Ayers, where do libertarians have it right? And Dr. D'Souza, where do libertarians have it wrong?
Well, libertarians covers a multitude of sins. There are, anarchists and libertarians kind of come together. I'll tell you where I think the anarchists and the libertarians have it right. A deep, deep skepticism of government, a deep skepticism of the imposition of the state into our lives. I think where they have it right is full support for sexual freedom. You can do your thing. And anarchists and libertarians would say full gay rights. In fact, I was having a discussion with a libertarian outside of one of my talks, and I said, I think we could agree on full queer rights. And he said, absolutely. And I said, including the right to marry. He said, no, the state should not be involved in marriage. If you want to get married with your cult or your neighborhood, that's fine, but not the state. And I said, okay, I agree. Full queer rights, everybody gets unmarried. That seems right to me. And then everybody can, then we're equal. So I think we agree on that. I think the other place that they get it right is close the Pentagon. Just close the Pentagon. Stop the $1 trillion drain on our lives. And I think libertarians believe that. I think they should. So that's where they get it right. You want to say where you get it wrong?
Yeah, libertarians are right. They're certainly right to be suspicious of government in general. I believe that whatever the government does, it does badly. That is just as true of the Defense Department as it is of the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
How about the roads? You like the roads? You like the roads? How about clean water?
Oh, I like clean water and clean roads, and I wish we had more of them. Look, here's the problem. On the issue of defense, I think libertarians are sometimes inconsistent. Jefferson used the phrase, empire of liberty. And his point was that if we believe in freedom, it's a little inconsistent and a little hypocritical to be for freedom only for us. We should want other people to be free as well. Now, I don't believe in achieving that by invading other countries. I like the Reagan doctrine. People should fight for their own freedom. You fight, we'll help. And so when the Afghan Mujahideen were fighting, against the Soviet Union, we didn't send troops, but we did send material assistance to the rebels to overthrow and that was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Empire. So libertarianism is half right on foreign policy. Libertarianism is almost completely right on economics, where libertarians are right is that the government, just as it doesn't have the right to interfere with your life, it doesn't have the right to reach into your pocket and take your wallet. That is also part of your freedom.
No, where the libertarians get it wrong is that they think that the market is holy. And so they say, the government bad, but these corporations that have taken over the government, they're good. That's nonsense. So even the idea that somehow the government spying on us is a bad thing, but Google spying on us is a great thing because of the love of the market and private enterprise. It's foolish.
Let me say, shouldn't the government not have that power to dish out in the first place?
To do what?
Shouldn't the government not have that power to dish out? The corporations buy the government, but shouldn't the government not have the power to dish back to the corporations?
What do you mean dish back, for example?
So when the corporations buy, I think we agree that when corporate money is involved with elections, they get their politicians to make favorable policies for corporations. However, shouldn't the government not have power to make favorable policies for certain corporations and not other corporations?
I'm still not following exactly what you're saying. I think the government is almost a wholly owned subsidiary of big capital. I mean, I think that it's a very dangerous situation. So you look at something like where we are in healthcare. We're the only industrialized nation that doesn't have universal health care for its citizens. And meanwhile, we pass this kind of weak bill a couple of years ago, which basically gives hundreds of millions of dollars to the insurance industry. What is that about? It's about the government, again, giving corporate welfare, which is what it does best.
We have time for one more question.
So, as a point of fact, I just wish to point out there are both statues of Moses and Muhammad in Washington, D.C., right above the columns on the U.S. Supreme Court's building. So, yes, we do have actually Moses in Washington, D.C. But my actual question is, we lost Nelson Mandela this year, very sadly. And I think we'd all agree we're against apartheid. I would like you, yes, but I would like you to speak to the fact that we support Israel with massive amounts of military aid, but they actually, in their laws, have codified that the Arabs are second-class citizens, and different laws govern the Arab and Jewish populace. Why do we as a government support an apartheid system today, and will we look as ridiculous as other governments? David Cameron, for instance, was part of an organization that supported apartheid. Will we look as ridiculous today as he does now?
Want me to go first? Yeah. The challenge of the State of Israel is that while America was founded as a society of individuals, a minority of one, as I say, Israel was founded with a different idea. And that was the idea of having a Jewish state. Okay? So think about that. It was the idea of creating a Jewish state. The Jewish state differs from the modern state in the way that the Old Testament differs from the New. The Old Testament was a single community with a single ideology. When Moses came down with the Ten Commandments and he saw Aaron worshiping the golden calf, Aaron didn't say something like, I have a First Amendment right to worship the golden calf, I'm going my own way. The idea of a Jewish state is to have, if you will, Israel does not have full separation of church and state. It is a Jewish state. All right. Now, you are, it seems to me, attacking the legitimacy of having a Jewish state.
I'm asking why we, as a government, support it. Because we do have our ideas. And if you believe in Reagan doctrine and they should fight their own fights, shouldn't they fight their own laws? Why do we support that?
Sure. Well, first of all, we have established a constitution and a way of life for us. We also recognize we live in a big world. Okay? And in a big world, we make allies with people, some of whom we agree with 100%, and some of whom we agree with 5%. Why? Because foreign policy is based on the principle of the lesser evil. And you sometimes ally even with the bad guy to get rid of the worst guy. And if you forget that lesson, then you do things like yank the Persian rug out from the Shah of Iran, our ally, and you get 40 years of Khomeini. And you get a country that is basically causing non-stop trouble in the Middle East, trying to build nuclear bombs. All of this is the legacy of one sanctimonious Jimmy Carter, who said, I want nothing to do with the Shah of Iran, he's a dictator, he has a secret police. And whoops, we get Khomeini, from the frying pan into the fire. Here's the point. Why do we support Israel? The truth of the matter is that what you have is sort of little Israel. It's a little outpost of Western civilization in a large piece of real estate that's fairly hostile to it. Now, I agree that Israel is a problem. Why is it a problem? It's a problem not necessarily just due to the Palestinians. What happens is that it seems like every 15 years, all the Arab states get together and gang up on Israel. And Israel kind of dusts it off, pistol whips the whole bunch of them combined. And it's really embarrassing, right? It's sort of like, here's little Israel. And so Israel is seen as the little Satan, and we are, if you will, the great Satan. We have to recognize that Israel's fate is sort of, certainly over the last 50 years, bound up with ours, for better or worse. So, it's a tough spot. I don't agree with everything Israel does. I'm not saying that we should be giving billions in aid to Israel or Egypt, for that matter. So I'm not putting this out of bounds for debate, but I am saying I'm really glad to have, albeit a small ally in the Middle East. And I think that if Israel were to vanish off the face of the map, that would be very bad for American interests, and it would also be very bad for the Jews.
I really appreciate your question. I appreciate your question. I want to point out two things. One is, we all support Nelson Mandela now. We didn't support Nelson Mandela when the fight against apartheid was actually going on. Nelson Mandela was only taken off the terrorist watch list in 2006. So let's get real about, now we all love him, and he was a grandfather who reconciled. How about his Rivonia speech when he was put in jail for life? How about reading that and seeing who the real Nelson Mandela was? He was many things, but he was a freedom fighter, and when he was a freedom fighter, the United States officially did not support him, and most of the people here would not have supported him. So that's what I mean, about getting real about history. I asked you about slavery and women's rights, and the question is there something 40 years from now that your grandchildren will look around and say, really? You did that, just like we say that about slavery. Are there things that we could do better? Extracting the last drop of oil from the ground, that's one example. Or mass incarceration, or money in politics. These are all things that your kids may look at you and say, really? It cost Obama $1 billion to be elected, and you called that a democracy? Ridiculous. I'm glad you raised the Israel question, because Israel is an apartheid state, and there are things we can do about it. It's ridiculous that this country alone supplies Israel, gives it the kind of money that it can stand up on. Israel was created not in an empty land, but in a land with people on it. And unlike most colonial powers, which take over and want people to stay, the British taking over India, Israel has systematically pushed out the indigenous population. And that's going on to this day, the settlements and the burnings. There is something you can do. Boycott, divest, sanction. The BDS movement, you can find it online. This is something that we should all be aware of and participate in, because Israel and Palestine exist there, and there is no justice unless we can figure out a way, they can figure out a way, really, the Palestinians to also have self-determination and a future to live for.
I'm afraid that's all the questions we have time for. Both Mr. D'Souza and Mr. Ayers will be outside after tonight's debate is over, and they can answer your questions at the book signing tables. I'd like to ask Mr. Ayers to... We only have so much time for the event tonight. I'm sorry. So if you have an additional question and you want to ask the speakers, please consider asking them after the event. Mr. D'Souza, Mr. Ayers, how do you feel?
I'm open. I could care less.
Go ahead.
You know what? May I propose a solution? If maybe we can have each person come up to the podium and ask a quick question, and then Bill and I will sum up and answer those questions so that we're able to keep the debate within time, but at the same time, hear everybody out. Would that be a reasonable proposal? Go ahead. It's your turn.
You want her to come up?
Oh, no, I was saying, no, I'm sorry. I meant just ask your question and we'll just take
come up to the podium.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I meant let's take all the questions and then we'll comprehensively answer.
You say take all the questions and then we'll just say something.
That's what I was proposing, if that makes sense.
My name is Min. I'm a sophomore at Dartmouth, and not Mr. D'Souza. I'm an immigrant myself. I came from Korea to the United States about 6 years ago, and I have benefited tremendously and gratefully from an education here. But I'd like to contest your assertion that America constitutes an unequivocal, a good force in the world. You have mentioned that America created mass prosperity for our peoples of the world, but that seems to me very condescending of and dismissive of all other invaluable histories, cultures, and peoples of the world. And to me, it seems, I'd like to gently remind you that not everyone in the world is enamored with American hegemony. And your exotic concept of Western modernity and globalization, although I admit that it has had some good effects in the world, has also carried with it many negative repercussions, from imperialism to warfare to subjugation of millions of indigenous peoples of this continent alone. And I'd just like to say that, for me, the greatest thing about America is its melting pot of a population and its ability to own up to its mistakes, whether it be its slavery or its subjugation of indigenous peoples. And for me, it seems very much contradictory that you propose to represent the immigrant experience and the immigrant voice and the immigrant perspective on America, when you yourself is so wholly biased in favor of American exceptionalism and complacency.
Thank you.
Okay. We're just going to take some more comments and then sum up.
I'm Professor Masters. First of all, Bill Ayers, you're right about Chicago. I went to the University of Chicago.
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I went to the University of Chicago. It's a great city. You're right. Dinesh was a student of mine. I'm very proud of him, and of course any mistake he made is his bad teacher. But one issue is very important for everybody in this audience. It's the greatness of the Constitution, and Dinesh is right about that in the First Amendment. The Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion and the free exercise thereof and the freedom of speech. That does not authorize a religion to announce that abortion is illegal in the Constitution. That's a violation of the First Amendment, and you have to know science to know that. What everyone in this audience needs to know is that what is not great about America is we live in the most scientific and technological society in the world, and our citizens and our students need to know more about science when they discuss political things.
My question is to you, Dinesh. You mentioned that you like Thomas Jefferson about the Constitutional Convention. What do you say about his belief that if you do not change the Constitution every 20 to 30 years, you are enslaving the next generation?
Hi, my name is Rachel. My question is for Dinesh. So you talked about Great Britain and how they went into India and put their thoughts and ideas in what India should be like, and then the United States went to Iraq with their guns and tried to create democracy. But what has Iraq benefited from the United States gone there? Like you said, India benefited from Great Britain going into India. Thank you.
Hi, my question is to Mr. D'Souza. I think that coming to this debate, I didn't know a whole lot about either candidate. I had a whole lot of opinions. I agree on things like, I don't know, American exceptionalism. There are definitely some aspects of it that are good. It has created some good things for the world. American capitalism has fostered a lot of things like innovation, things like that. So I guess I came into this agreeing with a lot of your ideals, and then I hear you talking about things like how the Native Americans would have continued shooting their buffalo and bison unless they had things like the Trail of Tears, or things like these American government colonialism imposed upon them, or things like how the poorest person in America owns 2 cars, or things about how Israel has gone around pistol whipping other countries every 10 years or so. And I guess my question to you is, do you really and truly believe the kind of rhetoric you are speaking, or is this like kind of a cost-benefit analysis between what gets the most attention in press and what, you know, factually speaks to the things, the ideals that you are trying to support?
My question goes to Mr. Bill Ayers. My name is Al Plass from Newbury, New Hampshire. I'm just a citizen of the state. Moved up here from New York, and I'm now living in the great free state of New Hampshire. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to make was this. It was going back to your questions of why we went into Iraq. I believe, if I am correct, that the majority of the Congress did vote on that, and based upon the facts that they had at the time, we went into Iraq based on that, weapons of mass destruction. And I think Mr. D'Souza was accurate on that as far as that goes. So we did go there. As far as where the money went to, as far as Halliburton and everything like that goes, my question to you would be is, why were you not on the front lines going against that? Okay? Because I'll tell you a little story about something that I heard from 2 kids that actually served in Iraq. One served for three tours, the other one served for 2. Okay? And the point that I'm trying to make is that when you talk to the people on the ground, being one of the troops over there fighting, what the people over there want is what we have here, and that's freedom. That's what they want. They want to be like us, okay? Which definitely makes this discussion over here go way overboard when you try to put down this country, or do you try to say that there's something wrong with this country. There is plenty of things wrong with this country. However, that is way outweighed by the things that are right with this country, including our boys going over there and fighting for those people, because those people want what we have. They will always want that. Whether they're put down by a tribe or another group that comes in to take over, that's where they're at. Amen.
Mr. D'Souza, your balanced and broad historical perspective shows how important immigration really is to this country. People like you are the future of America, not the jaded and cliched blame America always for everything types. I hope your friend gets a visa. My question, why is there such a consistently hypercritical view of America and the West and the right in our high schools, colleges, and media? Thank you.
My question is for Mr. Ayers. I've read a lot of your writings on education, and I'd like you to comment on what we can do as activists to help prevent the handing over of our public education to corporate interests and testing agencies.
If there are no more questions, I'd like to ask Mr. Ayers to give a brief conclusion and to sum up his remarks. We're going to ask you to give a brief conclusion.
Can you answer these questions at the same time?
No. The questions you can answer.
Bill, could you, can you in 5 minutes, can you do a little overview? And
You start.
Sure. I'll start. I remember many years ago, before I came to America, on the outskirts of Mumbai, there were a group of, I think they were Yale anthropologists who would come to India to study the local people. They set up a bunch of tents, and they pulled out zoom lens cameras, and they would do recording notes, and they were basically recording the lives of the slum dwellers outside of Bombay. And the slum dwellers would come up to these Yale anthropologists and say, basically, I want your genes. I want your camera. And the Yale anthropologists would say, oh, no, that's a very simplistic point of view. You are unfortunately in the prism of ethnocentrism. We are not here to affirm the superiority of Western culture. Your culture is just as wonderful from your perspective as ours is. Clearly, this is a veteran. These were veterans of many anthropology and sociology classes at the Ivy League. And the peasants and the slum dwellers would sort of peer at this and take it in, and they'd say, yeah, but can I have your genes? Can I have your camera? Now, what am I talking about here? There is a one-way movement in the world away from agrarian, impoverished societies of people who are grinding and eking a living out of the ground. People who are living in the rest of the world the way they have lived for millennia. All those people can now see that there is a better, more prosperous, more abundant way to live with more possibilities. And it is nothing short of shameful to go around lecturing those people on what they should want. From the benefits of Western modernity to sit privileged, enjoying all these accoutrements and telling other people that they don't deserve modernity is a disgrace. And you have no right to do it. Now, those are people who want what we have. And frankly, they don't want our generosity. They're not coming begging the way that a lot of philanthropists and social workers want them to beg. This is probably the greatest insult of globalization. The Chinese, we don't need you. We'll do it ourselves. We'll take over the world economy and we'll become the manufacturing center of the world. And we don't need your help. Send all your aid workers home. This is powerful stuff. They have learned our recipe. So, here's my point. Here we are, Dartmouth. You want to be in the middle of the 21st century? Don't sit around saying, okay, we did civil rights, we did feminist rights, we've done gay rights, now whose rights are we have? You know, you can do that if you want. This is a rich country. There's a lot of time to pass your time. You can do that. But this country, which is on the top of the world, is going to be sliding right down into third, fourth status, and other countries are going to come up and take our place. And they're going to have the kind of power that we have had since World War II. And it's going to be a very different world. And it's going to be a little bit of a tougher world, because those are people who believe in wealth creation, but they also believe in conquest. And we cannot expect them, when they have our power, to use it to achieve our priorities. I will assure you that the rise of the East, the rise of Asia, is going to mean not only the end of a lot of Western priorities, it's going to be the end of progressivism. Why? Because many of those countries want modernization, yes, Westernization, no. Now, what America still has is a great gift to the world. Someone asked a question about Korea. Started talking about the Indians and so on. Let's talk about Korea. Isn't it wonderful that South Korea is a free country? North Korea isn't. But had the United States not fought the Korean War, it is very possible that the North would have engulfed the South. And we would have a retarded dictator who just killed his uncle, telling this young woman's parents what to do and putting them in mass graves. And this is the real world we live in. So sitting around talking about multiculturalism doesn't really work when we're living in a real world where there is a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam, and the North overran the South, and a North Korea and a South Korea. The world is still the way it is. Look, I'm optimistic about America because it seems to me, not that America does things right all the time. We do things wrong a whole bunch of the time. But we do try. And we do try to live up to ideals that remarkably were there at the beginning. There's no new ideal that we've invented. The principles were always there. Sure, the founders didn't envision abortion, but they did envision privacy. They didn't envision the NSA, but they did envision unreasonable search and seizure. They didn't envision civil rights, but they did envision non-discrimination and equal rights under the law. And that's right there in the Fifth Amendment, and it's right there after the Civil War in the 14th Amendment. So yeah, the Constitution can be amended. It has a process in it to amend it. But that's my point. You want to change the Constitution? Follow the law. Follow the process. Don't sit around saying, well, Jefferson thought it'd be nice to do it every 20 years. Therefore, we get to appoint Supreme Court justices who will kind of ignore what the Constitution says and do what we think it should do. It should say. You want to play that game? There'll be a time when the Supreme Court is controlled by the other side, and they'll play it on you. So either we respect what the Constitution says, and if we want to change it, there's a way to do that. Ultimately, I think America remains the great defender of wealth creation. Look, the 20th century, America invented the airplane. America did not invent the car, but it mass-produced the car. America invented the computer. America invented, or certainly mass-produced, the cell phone. The whole information revolution of the late 20th century and early 21st century, America has played a critical role in creating possibility. And I'm not just talking about Chinese people now or Indians who can, who don't have to go to the beach to wash their clothes. Their lives are transformed. They have the same sense of possibility that you do right here at Dartmouth. And probably they're thinking over there, how do I get my kid to Dartmouth? That's the summit of their aspirations. And all I'm saying is, let's make it possible for them to do it. Let's realize that we have a great formula, and let's fight. Be community activists, not just to redistribute the pie, but to widen the pie.
We're at time.
And widen possibilities for the world. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm tempted to start. The National Geographic did a study some years ago of 18 to 25-year-old American kids. They asked them to identify countries on a blank world map. 80% couldn't find Iraq. 80% of American young people couldn't find Iraq. 80% couldn't find Israel-Palestine. 40% couldn't find England. And 10% couldn't find the United States. That one always makes us laugh because we could find the United States. The other ones, not so much. Draw a freehand sketch of Iraq, identifying the major cities. It's hard for Americans. That's what American exceptionalism leaves you with. It leaves you with a sense that we're the center of the universe and everybody should be like us. What's not exceptional is that everyone feels that they're exceptional. That's the crazy thing. So the idea of American exceptionalism, it just seems to me like a fool's errand. Why would we argue that we are the most important and everyone else should what? Bow down? The thing about American exceptionalism and the thing about the history that Dinesh brushes past is that it's a false construction completely. So for example, the history of the slave owners who founded this country, they didn't really want to have slaves, but they did it because it was necessary to found the Union. That is an absolute invention. Nothing like it is true. There's no truth to it. So look into the actual documents, look into the history and understand it. The idea that there are people out there lecturing people on what they should want in other countries. Where are those people? The people who are lecturing people on what they want are the people who are spending billions of dollars to invade those countries. And that's unjust, unfair, and ridiculous. You talk about Iraq. Actually, within 2 years, 80% of Iraqis wanted us out. That's what they wanted. And very typical of invading, occupying soldiers everywhere, you could hear almost every week somebody, a soldier in Iraq, saying, gee, we didn't accomplish everything, but when we got here, there was nothing here. Nothing, really, in the cradle of civilization? It's an arrogance that drives us the wrong way. It's an arrogance that is not only foolish, but deadly. So the country as it is a massive contradictions, as I said. It's rich with beauty and it's also and accomplishment, and it's also vicious with human denial. It's a place that both drains us and replenishes us. And this country is asking you to dive in. The tools are everywhere. Humor and art, protest and spectacle, the quiet intervention. You know, I often think that the bumper sticker that says, if you're not pissed off, you're not paying attention, that's a good bumper sticker. It's true. You should be a little pissed off at the things that are out of balance that we can fix. But it's also only part of the equation. The other part is love and generosity. We live in a system that asks us to be greedy and narrow and small. And what we should do is fight to strengthen our imagination so that we can be large and inclusive. As I said earlier, the recipe for activism is to see the world as it really is, to dive in, to be astonished, to do something, and then to rethink. If you repeat that for a lifetime, you'll discover for yourself what's great about America. I want to say one word about education. The situation that we're in education is catastrophic in this country, and I appreciate the gentleman's question. It's catastrophic because we have constructed education, as we've constructed health care and food and housing, a lot of other things, as a market and nothing more and nothing less. I don't buy that construction. I think education is a human right. If it's a human right, then everyone has a right to access to it. And that's how we should view education. If it's a market, then things like downsizing, crushing the collective voice of teachers, handing it over to private entrepreneurs makes perfect sense. And reducing education to a test score as if that's what makes an educated person. We should resist that, and we should resist it with a view that education in a democracy, if it's anything at all, it's based on that fragile belief in the incalculable value of every human being. And that means, among other things, that what the most privileged and wisest parents have for their children, we as a community should want for all of our children. We should demand it, we should insist on it, and we should build a movement that can make education, good quality, high quality education, a reality for all. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate for this evening. We ask as you leave to please take a look at the tables we have set up outside. I think both Mr. Ayers and Mr. D'Souza will be selling and signing books. If you have any interest in speaking with them or getting an autograph, please consider stopping by. Thank you.
We want to hear what you thought of the debate on our Facebook page. Wendy Lee Grant says, I watched the whole debate and